So JUnit is a unit testing framework which we discussed earlier for Java programming language, and it is important in the test-driven development. And JUnit promotes the idea of first testing and then coding, and which emphasis on setting up the test data for a piece of code which can be tested first and then can be implemented. Suppose again, as it says, it promotes the idea of first testing and then coding. And suppose if you want to just code for a login functionality, then you can just think of all the possible inputs which can just come to that piece of code, and then according to those inputs you can just code the logic. And this approach is like test a little, code a little, test a little, and then code a little. So in this, first of all, the sample inputs, then code for those sample inputs, then again take some other sample inputs, test that, and then code for those inputs. This basically increases the programmer's productivity and stability of programming code. And if code will be stable, and then this will reduce a lot of stress and times which will just spend on debugging. So let's discuss some of the features of JUnit. First of all, JUnit is an open source framework which is used for writing and running tests. So JUnit is open source. JUnit basically provides annotation to identify the test methods. As we discussed our example, whatever method we want to test, and we'll just mark it with annotation that is at test. So this basically identifies the methods which we want to test. And JUnit provides assertions for testing the expected results, and we discussed one assertion, that was assert equals, and we have many other assertions which we'll be discussing later. So JUnit basically provides assertions for testing the expected results, and JUnit provides test runners for running tests. So this was our basically a test runner class, and in this we had a run classes method from JUnit core, and inside this we basically pass the class for which we want to test for JUnit. And so this basically provides a test runner for running the tests. And next is JUnit tests allow you to write code faster, which can increase quality. So you can write the code faster, and the code has more quality. And JUnit is elegantly simple, and it is less complex and takes less time. So as you saw, this was a pretty simple example to check the expected result versus the actual result, and we just had to pass in the one class, and for checking any errors we used the fail variable, and if the result was successful, then we can just simply result is retrieve that using this result variable. And then JUnit tests can be run automatically, and they check their own results and provide the immediate feedback. And we ran our sample program, and when we ran this we just got the feedback. And since our program was expecting hello how are you, but since we were missing a u, so it just gives the appropriate message what was missing. So this is pretty simple to track. And then JUnit shows the test progress bar in bar that is green if it is going fine. So they basically it shows a progress bar, and if it is green, then your test is going fine. So now let's discuss unit test case. So a unit test case is basically a part of code which ensures that the other part of code or the method works as expected. And to achieve those desired results quickly, test framework is required. So now in this we have JUnit test framework, and so JUnit is the perfect unit test framework for Java programming language. And a formal written unit test case is characterized by a known input and an expected output. Suppose if you are writing a test case, then it is characterized by a known input. Suppose you know what input is gonna come and what result you are expecting from those inputs, and which is worked out before the test case is executed. So before executing the test case, you should know what is the input and what is the output you are expecting for those inputs. And the known input should test a precondition, and the expected output should test a post condition. So we have some precondition and post conditions for test cases, and there must be at least two unit test cases for each requirement, one positive test and one negative test case. So suppose if you have a particular requirement, so there should be at least two test cases. One should be the positive input, and you know this input will result in a successful output, and one should be a negative input for which you will have to handle the case. And if a requirement has sub requirements, then each sub requirement must have at least two test cases as a positive and negative. So if you have sub requirements for anything, then though your each sub requirement should have at least two test cases, and one should be a positive and one should be negative. So let's go ahead and JUnit testing framework. So JUnit is a regression testing framework, and it is mostly used by the developers, as we discussed earlier also, to implement unit testing in Java, and it basically accelerates programming speed and increases the quality of code. And JUnit framework can be integrated with the following, and it can be integrated with Eclipse, it can be integrated with Ant, and it can also be integrated with Maven. And right now we are just integrating it with Eclipse. So now features of JUnit. The features of JUnit are, we have some important features, and they are fixtures, test suites, and then test runners, and then we have JUnit classes. So first of all, we have fixtures. And fixtures is a fixed state of the set of objects as a baseline for running test cases. So it is basically a fixed state used as a baseline for running the test cases. And the purpose of a test fixture is to ensure that there is a well-known and a fixed environment in which tests are run and the results are repeatable. And these fixtures include setup method and a tear down method. The setup method basically is a method which runs before every test invocation, and the tear down method is basically a method which runs after the test or after every test method which we are using for the test. So now we'll be discussing a sample example of fixtures.